Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends of Eurac Research, welcome to the Global UNESCO Chairs lecture series invented by Professor Roland Benedikter. He is officially a UNESCO chair, the first one in the province of Bolzano, the first one at Eurac Research. Thank you very much for your interest. My name is Harald Pechlaner. I'm chairing the Center for Advanced Studies of Eurac Research. The Center for Advanced Studies is hosting also the UNESCO Chair of Roland Benedikter. And today we launch together this lecture series with this title, The World in 2050. But before we start, I have the honor to invite Professor Roland Psenner, President of Eurac Research. Under his patronage, this UNESCO Chairs lecture is starting today to give us a wonderful entrance and a start for this lecture series. Thank you very much to Roland Psenner for supporting us in doing that, what we do, not only launching this lecture series, but also supporting Center for Advanced Studies with his activities at Eurac Research. Professor Psenner.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Harald, for your kind words. Warm welcome to the participants of this lecture, but first of all, let me thank the creators of the chair and the organizer of this series for inviting me to say a few words from my perspective of natural history. So I have a background in microbiology and biogeochemistry, but then I spent most of my time in studying ecological changes of alpine lakes during the Holocene. So the Holocene, this is my time window in a way. And with this short period of human history in mind, I'm asking myself often, how might the world look in 2050? Or as some biodiversity experts put it recently, not how we live in 2050, but if we live. That's the question. And to answer the question, I refer to, I call it retrospective futurology. In 2005, I had asked experts from the natural and social disciplines to make an educated guess about the states of the Alps in 2020. So you see, I was humble enough not to go for 27 years, but just for 15 years. And 15 years later, in 2020, I asked the authors which forecasts we had actually made back then, whether the prediction had come true, and if so, why? And finally, what reason could have been if we had been wrong? So the most beautiful answer came from John Mathieu, a Swiss historian. He wrote a letter to me, and I'm citing, "When it came to characterizing the state of the Alps in the year 2020 in 2005, I felt the need as a historian to warn my esteemed colleagues from other disciplines of the great potential for deception in trend claims, especially when they concern the future. I also discreetly suggested that history is the only discipline that can really deal empirically with the future by addressing past futures and subsequently verifying them close to the source. It is a historically demonstrable fact," I wrote in 2005, "that utopias and visions almost never anticipate the respective future. Rather, they usually formulate an alternative or respective present." And he added, of course, other disciplines are also welcome to engage in historical work, but without the past, there is no empirically grounded view of the future. Well, maybe this is not a very nice beginning of a lecture series about the future, but I try to look back 50 years when Willem Oltmans, in response to the limits to grow of the report of the Club of Rome, published conversations with the most famous and renowned economists, philosophers, speech researchers, futurologists, scientists, anthropologists, and political scientists of his time. To the people of my age, the report of the Club of Rome was extremely influential. But to be clear, I am now not concerned with the report itself, but I'm asking myself how reliable were the statements of the most prominent and influential scientists of the time who commented to the report. I cite just one or two. The most important futurologist of that time was Hermann Kahn. For instance, he, echoing a speech by Robert McNamara, said, "It is very easy to redistribute wealth when the whole pie is growing, but when the pie shrinks, there is no redistribution." Avoiding, however, to talk about the consequences once this point will be arrived. So Margaret Mead was of a different opinion. Also Paul Ehrlich, the population bomb author, was quite cynical, saying expecting to change the system by putting in place more and more institutions that conform to the system is simply insane. Jan Tinbergen had a far-reaching, I call it today, a post-Greta Thunberg vision, for he was convinced that an equitable distribution of income among all countries be crucial to solving environmental and resource-related problems. So to me, the most important utterance came from Noam Chomsky, who is still, even at his age, almost the brightest minds in the USA. The idea of unlimited growth was, in his view, likely to create a consensus or conflict because demands for redistribution of wealth could be postponed in the future. But his crucial point was that, and I'm citing, with the disappearance of the hope of unlimited growth, a major element of social control is lost. Yeah, I think 50 years ago, these words were a call for a paradigmatic shift in social politics, to say the least. But this did not happen, and I fear it's still not in sight. We are moving now inexorably and ever faster towards the real limits to growth, which the authors of the report had placed in the future. This means around the turn of the millennium. So I think it's time now to consider that we have really reached this point, and that we have to consider now what is the future, what will the future bring to us. I think there is hope. And this is the ultimate reason for the UNESCO Chair that proposes innovative approaches to develop inter- and transdisciplinary views on what the future might hold and how we could shape the future. The global lecture series developed in 2050 connects UNESCO chairs from various disciplines with eminent scientists from different continents to provide a comprehensive joint vision of possible futures. And I would like to end this phrase saying, based on what we have learned from the past. Thank you and good luck. And now I'm passing the word to Harald Pechlaner.
Thank you, Roland Psenner. Thank you very much for this really important introduction. Yeah? In German, we would say a kind of Steilvorlage. Yeah? So the world in 2050, you showed us with some perspectives and developments in what direction the world eventually could go. But we all know that Professor Roland Benedikter, with his idea of foresight and anticipation, is always talking about a couple of futures. There is not one future, but we have many futures, which should be the starting point for further discussions. Roland Benedikter is co-head of the Center for Advanced Studies together with me, and as mentioned right before, UNESCO Chair in Interdisciplinary Anticipation and Global Local transformation. And in that regard, engaged in a couple of important circles and workshops on a governmental level in different countries, discussing with the political and economic level the forthgoing developments, the different futures of the world. But today, I think we go beyond. The world in 2050 is close enough to discuss it, but it's at the same way far away that we can just think on certain developments. And what we understand with the world in 2050 and what UNESCO Chair can contribute to that, and how the lecture series can contribute to this discussion, especially in South Tyrol, but not only. Roland Benedikter will show us now with his speech, which at the same time will be the introductory speech of the whole lecture. Roland, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Harald, for the kind introduction. And thank you for the justified objections, Roland, that you put at the start of this lecture series to pave the ground for a short introduction that I'm now providing into the state of the art of foresight as seen from a perspective of the UNESCO chairs, and especially from those who specialize on futures literacy, which will then illustrate the rest of this lecture series. I hope you see my presentation. Let me start this lecture series, and I mean it not only for what I'm going to say, but more in general, also for the following lectures, that we see a new need to look ahead. When we look at today's world, there are so many actors and movements of transformation underway that is indeed difficult to keep track and pace. There is an unprecedented variety of multifaceted crises and metamorphoses underway, and there is a multitude of ruptures, disruptions, turning points at work in all sectors of globalized societies. And this leads many of us, particularly the younger generation, to the perception that, as German social philosopher Hermann Lubbe put it, the present is shrinking as change seems to be happening faster and faster. And the result of such a perception, which has also taken whole societies in the West after repeated crises like coronavirus and then the recent Ukraine war, to the fear that control is lost, or loss of control psychology. To counter that, we need more than ever a look into the future, or better, a system of anticipation in order to preempt what may come. And the problem is that we all agree we want to look in the future, but what is, and this is the main question, if we want to do so in a multitude of perceptions of change we undergo today, what can be the frame of reference in looking to the future? How do we get to a sound big picture of what is going on? How can we order our thoughts? And last but not least, is there any consensus about the state of the world and its perspectives? Now, there's one consensus, certainly, that we live in the age of uncertainty. And uncertainty means that we need a frame of reference about the big forces in play. There is an approach that has been mainly developed for the American government, but has been taken also by European governments in the meantime, that departs from the assumption that we have to get our orientation by discerning 6 typological system action drivers, or as others call them, discourse formations, which are basically societal logics that influence the system as it moves forward. And this 6-dimensional system could be that we discern and integrate the discourses and logics of economy, politics, culture, religion, technology, and demography in order to create sustainability and resilience for the future in the tension between society and environment. Now, as you will see, if you take this very first blueprint for ordering thoughts, for ordering perceptions, for bringing some systemic view into the chaos of current change, you will see that this is a recurring motive throughout all contemporary foresight attempts, that these 6 realms, so to say, that drive the global system forward, both on the macro, meso, and micro levels, are recurring in all foresight attempts. So if you take this blueprint and ask yourself, what are the current forces that influence a crisis or a certain development, and you take these different viewpoints together, you will come to a first orderly but complex, appropriate lecturing of the phenomena. Now, the United Nations has taken parts of this system and has given us a very primordial blueprint already at the start of the 2000s, which are the 5 Ps of analysis and sustainable development. These 5 Ps have been since people, prosperity, peace, partnership, and the planet. A sustainable development is composed by these 5 Ps, and the idea is that you look at all happenings through the lens of including these 5 Ps in your view. That could enrich and at the same time order your perceptions. But the main frame of reference that we dispose of today are, of course, the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals are the most important frame of reference that we have today on a global level, at the level of a minimal consensus of how to look at the world and where the perspectives lie. And you have to consider, obviously, that if the first sustainable development goal, for example, is about eradicating poverty from the world, that in turn suggests that poverty is one of the biggest problems, systemic problems, that we have to consider if we want to move the world forward and look into a world of 2050. The same is true of, obviously, with goal 2, zero hunger. That suggests in turn that there is hunger in the world and that this is a major systemic problem that is a driver of development into the future. The same is true for all other sustainable development goals. And as you know, these goals are often interconnected among themselves, and they are not absolutely consensual. Some think that they must be criticized, others think that in the meantime, they must be further evolved. Now, the good news is that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, as the biggest and most extended typological blueprint of the world of tomorrow, which presupposes obviously that the 17 goals are achieved by the global community, then a new world will emerge, a better world will be created. The good news is that this basic framework has been split up and concretized in 169 targets. And you see an example here. Goal 1 is concretized in several sub-goals, so that the overall framework of the Sustainable Development Goals is a quite complex, adequate, and quite flexible instrument of how to look, not only analyze the present, but also how to go forward into a distant world that reaches certainly beyond 2030. The United Nations have, in the meantime, featured more than 3,500 events, more than 1,300 publications, and more than 6,700 so-called actions to implement these goals. Of course, the critique is given. One point of critique is that this is a joint reference that most SDGs share, that they share a reference to the Anthropocene, so to a man-made world, which is not a consensual concept. Others claim that there is an 18th SDG that would be needed now, the democratization of algorithms, data ownership, the internet, the global soft and hardware industries, which are impacting the world like never before. Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker, my colleague at the Club of Rome, always underscored the point that if the SDGs 8 and 10 would be realized, the world would implode, because if the whole world gets onto the economic level that the West and Europe enjoys today, the ecosystem would definitely collapse, and improving resource productivity even by 80% would not help. Most points, there's another critique, are so general that they are open for interpretation by different ideological inclinations. For example, sustainable, affordable energy as proposed in SDG 7. The European Union has now declared nuclear energy as part of the sustainability offensive. This is not consensual. So many things in the SDGs, both in the analysis and in the foresight, are disputed. And last but not least, there are two key terms that recur throughout the SDGs, which are sustainability and resilience, but they are not the same. In reality, they are often competing with each other in contrast, and they must be better balanced throughout the goals. Now, if this is kind of a blueprint that can evolve, that probably must evolve, that must be extended, and so on, it is absolutely sure, from my point of view, that the SDGs are the most precious instrument that we currently have, both to read the world, but also to move it forward. Now, the United Nations has gone a step further, and departing from the quite typological and general framework of the SDGs, has delivered an analysis of where the world stands now and how it goes into the future. And the first primordial analysis was Secretary General's Antonio Guterres' Foreriders of the Apocalypse of 2021. He told us that there are 4 major problems in the future until 2050, until we reach the mid of the century, which are climate change, sinister technologies, global mistrust, and global tensions. Now, the unit that is specialized in the United Nations for foresight has then, based on this analysis, released its general framework until 2015, which were the United Nations 75th anniversary key topics. And these are very interesting because to a certain extent, they take up the SDGs, but transform them into macro observations of big trends that are so to say, passing through the SDGs, leading the world into the future. The first is the climate crisis. This is one of the major forces of the coming decades, a race that we can win, as the United Nations propose. Second is a new era of conflict and violence. We see this not only in the Ukrainian war, but also in the fact that we have more wars today than ever before, which is a regress behind the hopes that we had at the start of the 21st century. Third, the impact of digital technologies. that is always ever more increasing and is both a factor of progress and of regress. The manipulation of elections is pondered by the progress of artificial intelligence in the health sector. So what we can say is that all these 7 dimensions, perhaps with the exception of the 7th, are ambiguous in themselves and present different chances, opportunities, but also risks. For this inequality, we must bridge the divide within and among nations that is widening. We have a shifting demographic landscape on the globe. We have 6 need for investing in health for an equitable future. And 7, the big topic that passes through all others and is certainly one of the keys into the future, is closing the gender gap, empowering women and girls. Now with this, if you take the Sustainable Development Goals and combine them with these 7 key topics of humanity to go into a future that is desirable, you have already some instruments of how to perceive the daily phenomena and read the news, for example. We could go into this a little further by analyzing what the United Nations then propose in detail to illustrate the observations why these 7 points are the decisive ones, why the respective trajectories will shape the future of humanity. I will not do this now because of time reasons, but you can get obviously this presentation and also a related article where I explain this a little bit more in detail. In any case, the 7 points that the United Nations have presented for the future are certainly points of reference that we have to consider. In addition, the United Nations most lately has also detailed some of the points in further subpoints. For example, the United Nations has released a report, a foresight report, specifying only the point 2, a new era of conflict and violence, because it's so timely. And it has split up this in sub dimensions that are drivers of the bigger point. For example, entrenched conflict, organized crime, urban and domestic violence, violent extremism, and not least, very important, new technologies that include the nuclear threat. Now, these are the instruments that the United Nations have proposed. And if you go a little bit deeper into them, you will find both opportunities for critique that I have mentioned briefly, but you find that this can really be an instrument of looking into the future to 2015, and that is politically also an instrument of concretization of programs with a view of the bigger picture. Now, a second global player in the foresight sector is the European Union. And the European Union has presented its Forward Look 2023 in January and has identified very similar. You see that all of these big players in the foresight sector converge to basic topics which correspond basically to the 6 dimensions that I mentioned initially. The EU Forward Look identifies 7 crucial trends, which are global fragmentation, polarization, the digitalization of basically every sphere of life, climate and environmental challenges, evolving economic models, demographic imbalances, and changing politics. So here you see that the general points of the United Nations are more or less taken up independently and framed in a specific geopolitical situation and context. For example, the shifting demographics that the United Nations have mentioned are seen a bit more skeptical through the lens of the European Union if you read the title Demographic Imbalances. So it's the same motive, but seen from a slightly different view. Now, the European Union says these 7 trends that will lead us to this mid of the century will produce 4 big trends. The first is scarcity, second is societal pressure, the third is weaponization, and the fourth is the need to maintain influence, especially for the global democracies, because authoritarian systems like China and Russia are closing in. They are forming new alliances, and they're trying to create a second authoritarian world order with the leverage of the Ukrainian war. Now, the European Union has elaborated on this, and I invite you to go a bit into this if you're interested. Interestingly, one of the biggest drivers of the future for the European Union is the polarization of societies, the manipulation of societies, and the weaponization also of the digital sphere, which has created a lot of upheaval, especially in Western democracies. The report of the European Union then says there will be some bumps ahead in the next years. We will pay more for energy. The inflation will stabilize on a relatively high level. And most important, in a global outlook, freedom in the world is decreasing. We have a shrinking number of countries which is considered have a free system, a political system. We have a relatively high number of partly free countries, and we have a sharply rising number of not free countries, which of course influences the global framework. The European Union has identified many, perhaps too many areas of potential conflict. Russia's war in Ukraine is just one of them. There are many, many other focal points for potential and actual conflict ahead, and we have to look at them. We have to look at them in a systemic way to master the coming years. One of these points, according to European Union, is rising migration, which is also used as a weapon, for example, by Belarus and Russia against the European Union to destabilize the European Union. Others see migration as a chance, as a huge reservoir for progress and for upholding the services that an evolved society needs. However, in any case, migration is a topic for the next decades. And the most important topic, probably according to European Union, is the next stage of advanced technologies. We have next level automation, the future of connectivity with 5G, the Internet of Things, distributed infrastructure like the cloud, next generation computing, quantum computing, neuromorphic software, even biocomputing, which is emerging, applied artificial intelligence. We have a new kind of programming ahead. We have different trust architecture with the broad introduction of blockchain, and we have the bio revolution, including bio-machine interface, BCIs and BMIs. Last but not least, we have next generation materials and the future of clean tech. These are decisive points, according to the European Union, to master the future. Europe, the West, but especially also the global South, has to find a balanced path of how to distribute, to share, and to take profit from these new technologies. Now, if we very briefly go into what the biggest powers foresee for the coming years, we have to look especially at the United States and China, which are the two biggest economies, but also the militarily most prominent players in the world, which also protect the global trade routes and play, therefore, a special role, which will not dramatically decrease over the coming decades, according to all predictions. In the United States, we have currently a huge debate about the options for a US grand strategy until the mid of the century. And there are four options. First, restrain global engagement of the United States. Second, deepen this engagement. Third, prepare and represent a liberal internationalism. And fourth, stay for yourself, isolate yourself, conservative primacy. In China, instead, there is not such a debate what the grand strategy is, because it's an authoritarian regime that proposes this strategy or imposes this strategy from above as the new Chinese dream, or as Xi Jinping prefers to call it, the dream of national rejuvenation. And here you see a basic motive of China, that China, when it speaks of the globe, mostly thinks of itself of a national and not a global rejuvenation. The three pillars of this declared strategy, as Xi Jinping has drafted them, are first, reassurance of China's place in the global environment, in the global development and policy. Second, resist any change of the one-party rule. And third, reform the Chinese post-communist system towards a globalized bureaucracy. So expand the whole system that China has partly successfully established at the price of freedom, obviously, to other countries, for example, by the means of big infrastructural projects like the so-called New Silk Road or the global energy grid project that proposes to put together, to interconnect the electricity grid of basically the whole world under Chinese leadership, which is the favorite project of Xi Jinping. The question in this framework is obviously, how will the relationship between these two major influences of the global system further evolve? And at the moment, we discussed three options until 2050. First, we will have two globalizations next to each other, one led by China, authoritarian globalization, one led by the United States, democratic globalization with all restrictions depending on who will be president. So one option is there will be two globalizations with parallel partners, economic interconnection, political and military rivalry. Second, colliding competitors, so that there could be a war or an open confrontation. As you know, a couple of weeks ago, the chief of the American chief of staff has issued the command to prepare for war with China about Taiwan within the next 3 years' time, which has worried many also in the American sphere. So will there be a collision, or are there simply third diverging directions? However you see it and what will happen, you will have an influence on the overall path and direction of the globe for sure, out of the relationship of these two powers. Last but not least, in this short list of major players is Germany. We have a future circle of the German federal government, which discerns between trends and emerging topics for the German outlook until 2050. And the three major topics are: first, trust in digital civilizations. How can we restore solidarity in an environment that through technology isolates people? Second, man-machine convergence. How do we deal with the new technologies, mind control of machines, new processes, but also new military and civil robotics, intelligent robots? Do we give them person rights, or what is their liability in the legal sector? What is the status as citizens or not non-citizens? These are big topics that emerge and that the German government tries to anticipate before at the mid of the century, as many in Germany and in the United States and in Japan expect. They will live, so to say, as many intelligent human-like robots in our societies as human beings. How can we anticipate such a situation? And these are the topics. And to confront this, a third center of gravity of the Future Circle has been to elaborate on 112 different future scenarios for Germany, but also for Europe. This has been published. Take a look, it's very interesting. We have, among the 112 different topics, we have all kinds of trends and emerging issues that are then broken down into in-depth analysis that you see here, where the criteria are: is this a minority observation or is there consensus? When will this happen, this new development, and what will be the effect? Will it be weak? Will it be strong? These are methodologies that could also serve to concretize some of the goals of the United Nations in the future. Japan, on the other hand, is its own, pursues its own future global strategy in some exchange with the United Nations, and it has explored all kinds of things. Interestingly, also again, with a very strong focus on future technology, most in Japan expect that technology will substitute culture until the mid of the century. So the importance of different global cultures will decrease dramatically and be replaced by a leveling, neutralizing force, cultural force, which is technology. And Japan prepares accordingly in different sectors of society, basically, to make it short, in all sectors of society. And if you summarize what the Japanese have found, then they have found that technology will be the all-penetrative force on which the whole of society depends, but also, as you see it here on the right side, Visions of the Society of 2040, a direct excerpt of the Japanese foresight process. There will be a crucial element in the melting, in the convergence between machines and the human body and mind. For example, the Japanese foresee a crucial role for a new science of emotions, and the transmission of emotions from humans to machines and vice versa. And therefore, Japan prepares to adapt its values, its societal values, to a new techno-human society. Interestingly, the Japanese want a reconsideration of the human being, strive for harmony between the real and the virtual worlds, are for the expansion of human individuality by virtual assistant technologies, and ask for the coexistence of optimization with customization. The UN High Panel on Digital Cooperation instead, which has released the Age of Digital Interdependence report, says the future of humanity will decisively depend on how it masters digital cooperation. And the panel, led by Melinda Gates and other prominent figures, has proposed in 2019 a path towards 2050 with the help of mainly developing new instruments in the sphere of digitalization, which should promote trust, security, and stability. Critics say this is absolutely unrealistic because in the competition between China and the United States, there can and will be no such thing, especially considering that And nowadays we don't have one internet anymore as the founders dreamed of, but we have a splinternet, an internet that is already split up in 5 completely different realms, be it juridically, be it functionally, according to world powers and geopolitical considerations. One of the most important and interesting reports comes from the Sustainable Development Solutions Networks, a global initiative for the United Nations, which has presented the World in 2050 report quite recently. And it has found that these are the most important drivers towards the mid of the century: the digital revolution, smart cities, food, biosphere and water, human capacity and demography again, consumption and production, and decarbonization and energy. Without entering into the details, we can say that also the Club of Rome, which was mentioned by Roland initially, has renewed its focus on crucial driving forces, major trends, so-called mega trends of humanity, identifying 5 crucial dimensions. First of all, interestingly, emerging new civilizations. Second, rethinking finance. Third, most important for the Club of Rome, youth leadership and intergenerational dialogue. Fourth, planetary emergency, so the climate crisis. And again, reframing economics. Interestingly, they discern between finance and economics, a very smart differentiation, and they put a much larger focus than most today's global leaders on youth and youth leadership, which I think is quite interesting. Now, to sum up, if we take only these examples that I mentioned of how we will reach the mid of the century and how we can reach it, it is important to note that the overall remaining framework, the framework that puts it all together, can only be the framework of the United Nations, including its sub-bodies like UNESCO or the WHO and others like the EOM. Why? As Joseph Nye's theory of relations has shown since the 2010s, there are too many players and too many foresight processes that compete with each other and that would not find together and not interrelate with the United Nations. Joseph Nye has told us if there are 3 countries, then there are so-and-so bilateral relationship. When we have 10 countries, then there are 45 relationships, among them bilateral. And we have 100 players, then you have 5,000 bilateral relationships. If we return to a world that enacts the future and engages with the future through bilateralism or multilateralism without the overarching umbrella of the United Nations, I think it is absolutely obvious that we are lost. We need a forum that holds us together to take us into the future. Second, and this is now the concluding point, we need a new science that guides us into the future. As you saw, we have some frameworks, we have some frames of reference, and this is quite important to lay the ground for activities in the single fields, which will then in our lecture series be illustrated by the following speakers. But the overall picture needs a scientification. So we must make out of foresight and predictions and expectations, strategies. We must make out of this science of anticipation, which we don't have, but which is emerging at the moment. Real Miller of UNESCO, one of the fathers of UNESCO Future Literacies and of the UNESCO Chairs program, has taught us that there is a possibility to make the discipline of uncertainty the science of anticipation. And in fact, UNESCO has started building a network of futures of educations, which are also education system for the future. And the challenges of scientific anticipation research currently are certainly many, the most important of which is to build 21st century curricula. We must introduce globalization in our schooling systems. We must introduce localization in our schooling systems. We must introduce anticipation and foresight to a very different extent than it has been enacted so far. And UNESCO has proposed that we must build not only peace in the mind of men and women, but also overcome the poverty of imagination, building educational futures, and most important, democratizing people's images of the future, which is a very, very important goal of the next years. Now, to do so, UNESCO has created an UNESCO Chairs network, which basically is about sharing visions about the future, promoting future studies and futures competences in different fields, and serve as a laboratory of ideas, as a clearinghouse, as a standard setter, as a catalyst and motor for international cooperation, and as a capacity builder. If this succeeds, if we can combine the frame of reference that we have with the United Nations integrative role on an interdisciplinary basis in the global sphere, if we can combine this with a proper complexity-oriented, complexity-adequate education that renews our global commitment, then I think we are on the right path to a future, and to a future science that can truly be a help and a valuable instrument to guide us to the mid of the century. And with this, I thank you for your attention, and give the word back to Harald, which I think will offer you the option of discussion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much to Roland Benedikter for his really, really interesting speech, presentation, I would say lecture at the end, with showing us what we have to understand under a discipline of uncertainty, but showing us the different approaches on a global scale. And well, as Roland mentioned before, you are invited to use the last couple of minutes we have to make questions. We had some discussions in the chat. You can also send a chat message or message by chat. There was a discussion on the Anthropocene. Thank you very much. We have an expert with us, Professor Roland Psenner, now from David Oberhollenzer. But right before we come to this question, Roland, let me just make a more general question, just in order to start. You were talking about, well, the 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, then the 169 targets. But coming back to the SDGs, we discuss in a more intensive way the conflicts when we go to implement the 17 SDGs. Well, conflicts, not that much military conflicts. That's not that what I like to say, but I think conflicts in how to agree and how to create participation in order to create acceptance also for that what we have to do when we go to implement the 17 SDGs. On one hand, so this many conflicts coming up. And on the other hand, with this age of uncertainty, quite a lot of fear, allow me to say. So in broader societies, we have now also this fear. This fear is coming from this complexity of different crises. Yeah, I guess you described it. Yeah, so conflicts on one hand, fear, a certain atmosphere of fear on the other hand. Yeah? So democratization, participation will be some interesting instruments. But what is your opinion about that? So how can we create an atmosphere, a positive atmosphere, in order to create this, let me say, interest in not only in globalization, but also interest in the global dimension of everything what we do?
Yeah, this is a very good and very big question, as it should be. I see two aspects here in play that will be decisive. First of all, the restoration of trust in democracy. We had a polarization within our systems that has really hurt the solidarity principle and the principle of comparing and taking futures not as granted, but on building them on facts. As Barack Obama said, if we don't know anymore what facts are, or if we cannot agree upon what a fact is and what not, we have no democratic dialogue anymore, because there is no common ground for discussion. So, and this is also why the German government, for example, has, as I mentioned, one of the biggest focuses on rebuilding trust in digitalized societies. The second thing that I see, as I mentioned, is futures education. We must renew the education for young people. As I observe day by day, young people don't want to have much of a show or of an illustration of the big problems. They just want to have plain talk about whether the world is going down, is entering a global catastrophe or not, and what they can do. So I think the first thing that we have to do, if we want to reach the mid of the century in an appropriate way, we have to serve the youth. We have to serve them new models of knowledge, new models of recognition. We have to listen to their voice, and we have to include them in building futures of education. If we combine these two things, restoring trust in open societies, because if we don't, only the closed societies with their global aspirations like China and Russia will take profit from it. We must restore trust as the basis of solidarity. And on the other hand, we must urgently renew our educational system. And I mean, what we are doing as global network of UNESCO Chairs is nothing else. We want to contribute also by this series of lectures to renewing the knowledge and the awareness of people, how important the future has become and how it can evolve. What kind of instruments do we have? What frame of reference is there? Is it right or is it wrong? Also to foster a critical consciousness of the global development we are embedded into.
Thank you, Roland. Let me continue with the chat-based questions. David Oberlenzer, just one word to India. Yeah? So what is the role of India, in your opinion, now becoming not only a huge country, but the third largest economy? So what is the role of India?
India is an emerging giant. It has been for quite some time. The global community has expected this giant to rise much earlier, but now we are in a phase where India is becoming a global player by its own right, not only militarily with its first air carrier, but also by other means, by economic differentiation. At the same time, you see India a typical example of a politically torn player in the midst of two globalizations on the rise. So we don't have anymore one globalization process, but two globalizations processes that compete with each other. And India is a typical example of a society that has been renationalized partly and is now insecure which path to follow. Economically speaking, it is part of the open societies in the West, also formally in its political system, but de facto it is an ally of Russia and China and is pursuing very ambiguous ambitions in its global outreach, being at the same time a political and ideological ally of China, at the same time its main competitor of the future, as everybody knows. So we live in a complex world, and India is no exception here. And if India has one task ahead, then it is to decide whether it wants to follow the path towards a true democracy, a part of the democratic alliance, or if it goes rather in the direction of becoming a regressive democracy in order to join the alliance of autocracies. This will be the biggest choice ahead. And we would expect this choice to happen within the next 5 to 10 years, according to the circumstances that India is confronted with in its more nationalist foresight.
Yeah, thank you, Roland. Let us come slowly to an end. There was a question by Eva Maria Spreitzer related to the frames of reference. How would you position development movements like the IDGs, the Inner Development Goals, as an instrument to look onto the future by working on or with worldviews, assumptions people hold as a lever of change? So probably 2 sentences about that, and then we come to the last question.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it at the start that spiritualities and religions is the more churchified, the more systemified version, but spiritualities in general are playing a huge role, especially in times of crisis and transition, and this will not change over the next decades. So I expect spiritualities to stay and become even more of a decisive actor and influence, at least as ideologies are. So we have 2 forces, ideologies and spiritualities, and these inner development goals are certainly one of the most intriguing and also inspiring approaches. I haven't mentioned that because this would lead us in a direction of deep discussion whether these inner development goals are ideologically preformed, how they relate to the existing religions, and how they are also appropriated by different regimes such as Russia and others. Far-reaching debates that we will have in the coming years.
Thank you. Julia Vögele, thanks a lot for the highly interesting lecture. Since future studies heavily promotes open heterogeneous views of the future, I wonder how we can manage to agree on a global strategy here. What do you think, Roland?
How can we agree upon what?
On a global strategy here. Yeah? So, well, we have the institutions, you described the institutions where we have different levels of strategy, but also different institutions proposing strategies. So how we can agree on a global strategy here?
So I think there will be no global strategy in the coming years simply because there are 2 competing blocks. The democracies versus the autocracies, they have been closing the ranks, using the Ukraine war as a leverage, as I said. Independent of the outcome of the Ukrainian war will have been a decisive game changer in the world, because it has made sure that the autocracies grow together, that they foster their own globalization. So I don't believe we come to a true global strategy. What I believe rather is that in the 6 realms that I mentioned at the very start, economy, politics, culture, religion, spiritualities, technology, and demography, you will have sectorial global strategies. That is possible. We can agree upon a global strategy in demography if we want to. We can agree on a global strategy or more international strategy in the field of migration. The United Nations have forged global agreements, although non-binding. So I rather think we will have global strategies in single fields. And second, to answer your question, I think that the future of global strategies is not necessarily in the governmental field, but much more in the civil society fields. For example, our colleague Manfred Steger, global studies scholar, emphasizes very much the global initiative of global cities, to which in the meantime more than 1,000 cities have adhered, where mayors of major centers in the world, independent of their geographical location and their ideological affiliation with governments, have allied in order to bring the world forward, in order to foster green energies, to transform cities towards interconnected, intelligent cities, towards resilient places. So initiatives under the radar, below the radar of the big governmental geopolitical strategies that put people together, for example, in the major global cities initiative, are perhaps one of the vehicles of global strategy of the future that parallel those grand strategies, which most probably over the coming years will rather compete than converge.
Roland, there are two questions more. Let me bring together these questions, and so that we come to an end, unfortunately, because this discussion is really interesting and the questions are important and your answers as well. Ted Fuller, thank you for important wide-ranging perspective on how the future is framed in political narratives. If we understand the future as a contested space, how might anticipation address the hidden and not so hidden contestation? This is one question. The other one is by Alison. How will the past be used in the future? We see the use of heritage in conflict, but also as a resource for social cohesion and identity building. Will heritage have a more positive, more transformative role? Make one answer, a short answer, combining the two questions, Roland.
What I love in these debates of the UNESCO Chairs is the horizon. So it's the wide breadth and the beauty of these questions that are in front of us. So thank you so much for these very, very beautiful and important questions that really touch upon the future of humanity. I think that heritage indeed will play a bigger role, although I sometimes fear that this is much more a European fantasy than a Chinese or an American one. But heritage, as we see, for example, in the UNESCO Chair development, is becoming an important anchor for identity in times of transitions. So my answer is yes, and it is a very interesting field to build upon. In very, very different ways, not only in conservative, but also in progressive ways. The first question of Ted Fuller is the question of a master in our field. Ted Fuller is one of the most respected scholars and UNESCO chairs that I know of. I'm personally a huge follower of his writings and work. Ted will show us himself in his lecture how a responsible future can emerge out of conflicting interests and strategy buildings. I personally think that it is still the case that conflicting approaches to grand strategy can build something new, can be a positive confrontation that sparks the emergence of new ideas. At the moment, after the crisis of the coronavirus crisis, but also the Ukraine crisis and developments in the background, I'm a little bit more pessimistic than I probably have been before this crisis. Nevertheless, our profession, and I want to conclude with this, our profession, Harald and Roland, is and all the UNESCO chairs is to be optimistic. This is our duty and this is our profession, to take the chances that the current situations offers us and to take these chances for the good of people, let people participate in order to progress. Nothing else makes sense. it doesn't make sense, in my view, either if Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been very negative and very apocalyptic in his predictions. It might be that these predictions are true, but we have to do everything to create a positive outlook despite and against all odds. And I think we are on a good path in the United Nations and in UNESCO to lay the ground for such a positive trajectory.
Yeah, thank you, Roland Benedikter. Thank you very much for the lecture. Thank you very much to all of you for making questions, really interesting and important questions. Roland, you, with your answers, gave us a bit more, let me say, ideas about this future world. Really, really, indeed. Thank you very much for this great starting lecture of a bigger series. So please, dear all, keep in mind that from now on, we start with interesting lectures. March 7 with Loes Damhof, UNESCO Chair on Futures Literacy from the Netherlands. March 14, Roberto Poli from Trento. March 27 with Rika Preisler from Stellenbosch in South Africa, and so on and so far, if you allow me to say, until the end of July. You will have the opportunity to join us and to listen about different ideas, similar ideas, but at the end, this was the idea of Roland Benedikter, bring together different views. At the end, we can create, let me say, an interesting imagination of that, what the world in 2050 can be. So thank you very much again to you, Roland, to UNESCO Chair collaborator Katharina Krepatz, to all the UNESCO shareholders who were present today. They are forming the pillars of that, what the world in 2050 could be. Thank you very much to Professor Roland Psenner, President of Eurac, for his support, and thank you very much to the team of Center for Advanced Studies at Eurac Research for helping in organizing not only this lecture of today, but the following lectures of the next months. Thank you again. Hope to see you on March 7, same time, same place, I would say, at 1 p.m. March 7. Thank you very much again. All the best. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.